You said. Asked me if I should stop or continue. I was worried that if I stopped I might regret it, but part of me felt guilty at the thought of ignoring someone who might be in trouble eventually. My fear overcame all my worries. I gently pressed the accelerator and the car started moving. Past him I couldn't take my eyes off him like a statue. Then as soon as the front of my car was parallel to him he tilted his head slightly as if he was judging me. My chest tightened so much I could hardly breathe. The whole moment felt heavy and dense, like time had slowed down. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. I continued to move forward and my car had completely passed him. I glanced in the rear view mirror. Immediately my heart was pounding. The headlights illuminated the tree trunks, the grass by the road and a small section of hedge. The man was gone. That was what made me shiver. One moment he was there, the next moment the place looked empty. I craned my neck trying to catch any movement behind me, but I saw nothing but the faint outline of a tree. A shiver ran down my arm. I took a few shaky breaths. My mind tried to make sense of it. Logically maybe he was out of sight, or maybe I just couldn't see him in the dark, but the suddenness of everything being there for a second then gone was almost impossible. At the same time I knew there was no evidence of anything beyond that strangeness. That didn't mean he was gone, but it definitely was. I kept driving, pressing the accelerator a little harder than usual. My eyes kept glancing towards the rear view mirror even though I wasn't sure what I expected to see. My palms were slippery on the steering wheel. I wiped one hand on my pants, then switched hands and did the same. The same with the other. My breathing was rapid and my pulse was pounding in my ears. I forced myself to slow my breathing by counting in my head. The road continued through more fields and patches of trees. I passed a rusty barn, then a small cluster of sheds near the driveway, all of them dark and quiet. The tension in my chest, it doesn't go away. I turn on the cabin light for a second just to feel less alone. After a few seconds I turn it back off because it makes it hard to see outside. I keep thinking about what I just saw. The man was standing. His clothes looked like they had been dragged across the ground and his eyes looked so intense. I tried to reason maybe he was just a tramp or a lost person, but why was he staring like that? Why was he walking towards me like he wanted to stop me but didn't signal for help? I got no answer. About 10 minutes later I came to a small gas station. It was closed, but the parking lot had a few vending machines. I drove and parked under a dim overhead light and turned off the engine. I sat there for a minute panting, trying to get the feeling over the fluorescent lights, the buzzing and moths fluttering around. I realized I was hungry, but my nerves were so sensitive I didn't have any appetite. I just wanted to calm down. I climbed out of the car and walked away. Walked to the vending machine and grab a bottle of water. The air outside is damp and cool and I notice my hands are shaking a little as I unscrew the cap. I take a long sip. The water feels good, but my stomach is still rumbling. I look back at the road, half expecting to see a shadowy figure appear. There is nothing there. The only sounds are insects and the buzzing of the vending machine. After a few minutes I get back in the car and start the engine. I take off down the highway again, determined to put more distance between me and that stretch of road. I try to find a radio station with talk shows or some music to keep my mind focused on normal things. The interference is strong, but I eventually find a weak signal playing some old rock songs. The rest of the trip is tense, but I don't see anyone else on the side of the road. Every time I turn a corner I find myself bracing myself for a shadow to appear. It doesn't happen though. Eventually farmland gives way to a few scattered houses and a small intersection. There were flashing traffic lights. As I reached that intersection, I felt relieved. My body relaxed a little and I realized how stiff my shoulders were. I got home around midnight. The first thing I did was lock my car and check my windows. I usually don't worry too much, but that night, I felt the need to be sure. When I got in, I kicked off my shoes, put my luggage down and went straight to the bathroom to wash my face. The cold water on my skin helped me feel calmer. I saw my reflection in the mirror and saw that I looked very confused. My eyes were wide open, my face was a little pale. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept imagining the man walking out towards my car, his eyes staring at me. I woke up with a start after a few. Now my heart is pounding. The next day I got up early, made some coffee and tried to forget about it. I thought it was just one of those weird experiences on the road. Maybe I should call the local police station to report a suspicious person, but I didn't have a license plate or anything to give them, and he didn't actually commit a crime. He was just there and then he wasn't there. For the next few weeks I avoided that route. At night if I had to go to work I chose another route even if it was longer, but eventually circumstances forced me to drive that Long again this time I left earlier in the afternoon so I still had some daylight. As I went through the whole driveway I was on the verge, my stomach was tight and my hands couldn't relax on the wheel as I got closer to where the sun was setting behind the horizon, but there was still enough light to see the tree. I slowed down and glanced to the right of the road. There was no one there. The tree looked normal. The fence had the same farmland. The other side of this place looks empty, but my heart is pounding. I feel a layer of sweat on my forehead. Despite the comfortable temperature, my legs are tense and my foot hovers over the accelerator pedal ready to accelerate if I catch a glimpse of anything unusual. Nothing happens. I pass by that spot keeping pace and finally letting out a breath. I didn't realize I was holding my breath. I passed that spot a few more times since then. I never saw that man again, but each time my pulse quickens and I feel a cold feeling in my gut. It doesn't make sense, but my mind pulls me back to that night. I still picture him standing there covered in grime. Eyes locked on my headlights, I replay the moment he stepped forward and I wonder what his intentions were. If I stopped, would he ask for help, or would things have gone differently? I have no answers. All I have is the memory of that strange encounter in the middle of nowhere. At least to me, I felt the tension in my bones. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Nothing supernatural. It was just a man, but there was something about him that was off. That was what made it so scary. It was a normal road, a normal night, but I still shiver when I think about it. My hands get wet remembering the way he looked at me. Sometimes people ask me why I get so restless on country roads. I don't usually share this story because it sounds like nothing happened, but it was exactly that. It was just a person standing next to a tree at night, but it made me feel like I was in serious danger. I try not to think about it anymore. I'm still wary whenever I pass that area. If I see someone standing on the side of the road, I slow down enough to get a better look, but I rarely stop. Maybe it's selfish, but I don't want to have to find out the truth the hard way. If my intuition is right, that night basically no dramatic ending at all. I got home safe and I never found out who he was or what he wanted. All I know is that his eyes seemed to cut straight through the darkness and locked onto me. The fear I felt was so pure and immediate. That feeling hasn't faded even now. If I close my eyes and picture that spot on the freeway, I can almost feel my heart rate increase again. Maybe it was just a random guy, or maybe it was something else. There was something else going on. I'll never really know, but that's why it felt so real, so vivid. There were no flashing lights or other signs, just a man on the side of the road. That was all it took to shock me more than I'd like to admit. I never thought a few words on a wall could shock me, but I was wrong. The first day I walked into that basement studio, I felt sure I had found a hidden gem there, very quiet with thick walls and flowers blocking out the noise of the city. I wanted a space to practice and record, and it seemed perfect. Then I found those messages and everything changed. I will walk you through step by step what happened the way I remember. I am not adding any fancy decorations or insights. I will just tell you what I did, what I saw, and how I felt at the time. I discovered this place through an online ad. The ad showed a few photos of a cramped but comfortable room with exposed pipes on the ceiling and foam panels on some of the walls. The ad mentioned good acoustics, cheap rent, and no neighbors complaining about noise. I used to have a small home studio before, but my neighbors were always annoyed if I recorded late. Strong hallway. There are a few doors on the left, all closed, and pipes running along the ceiling. We stopped at the last door. Inside it wasn't pretty, but there was enough room for my stuff. The foam panels on the walls were torn up a little and a few cables were in the corner. There was a single overhead light with a fluorescent tube flickering. The manager said I could replace it if I wanted to. I would tap my foot on the concrete floor. Solid sound didn't travel far. This was exactly what I needed. I signed the lease a few days later. The price was low and the manager seemed happy to finally have someone reuse the studio. He told me it had been empty for months, which made it didn't feel like a glamorous place, and it probably took a specific type of tenant to want a studio in the basement. I liked the isolation. On my first official day as a tenant, I took the monitor and a few instruments downstairs. I also took cleaning supplies. The walls looked dirty and the floors needed to be cleaned. Cleaning, I wanted to get everything in order away, so I put my stuff down and knelt down to dust the corners of the room. I remember hearing my breathing, a slight echo. It was a small space, but you could feel the echo. I liked how real it felt. Studio environment. I was cleaning the wall near the door when I saw those words written in thin black marker on one side, about knee high. Did you hear his voice? At first I thought it was just some leftover graffiti. I squinted at it and noticed the letters were shaky, like Someone had written them in a hurry. It looked more like a question than a random phrase. I ignored it. I saw weirder things in the rehearsal space. People like to write nonsense on the walls. It didn't scare me, but it just felt weird. But I focused on cleaning later. A few hours later I had dusted off most of the dust. I set my monitors up on a sturdy table I had brought and plugged them in. I put my mic stand in a corner and put some cables in. I checked everything out. The place has good acoustics as advertised. The overhead light still flickers occasionally. I tried tapping on the furniture, but that didn't help. I figured maybe I'd replace it later or bring a lamp. I spent the next few days bringing in more instruments. By the end of the week I had everything: a keyboard, a couple of guitars, a small drum machine and some chairs. The environment was very quiet except the slight noise from the ventilation ducts was from the caretaker, not the manager, but a young man in overalls who passed by a few times. He was usually cleaning the hallways or checking the ducts. He barely said anything, just nodded at me. Then the night I stayed late for the test recording, the building was mostly empty after 7 p.m. I got there around 6 a.m., set up the mic and started playing some loops. I didn't notice anything strange for about an hour. I recorded a simple guitar part and tried out some lines. I stopped to listen back through my headphones, and that's when I realized how quiet the hallway was, which isn't unusual, but it was heavy at around 8:30 p.m. I started packing. I walked towards the wall with the lights going out one by one, the overhead light flickering and noisy. I flipped the switch and the room darkened, leaving a soft glow from the hallway light. As I went to unplug my device I noticed something on the floor near the desk. I knelt down with a red marker. The words "He saw you." They were almost the size of the black letters on the wall. 0. My first reaction was confusion, then it suddenly spiked panic. My chest tightened and my heart was pounding. I looked around, but I was alone. I picked up a nearby rag and some spray cleaner, trying to wipe it off. The red marker smudged a little but didn't come off. My hands shaking, and I felt this. A feeling of being watched, like I wasn't alone in that basement. I rubbed harder, but the stain didn't completely go away. I picked up my phone and used the flashlight to scan the rest of the floor. I didn't see any other messages. I checked the corners under the desk behind my equipment. Nothing else was there. I didn't hear any footsteps or voices. The caretaker hadn't been in all that time as far as I knew. I felt my pulse quicken. I was breathing hard and my palms were sweaty. I decided to get out of there. I turned off all the other lights, locked the door and rushed up stairs. I didn't see anyone in the hallway or lobby. The building seemed deserted that night. I didn't sleep well. I tried to tell myself it was just some graffiti left, but I couldn't shake the thought that it looked new, as if someone had done it recently. The next day, in the morning, I came back earlier than usual. I saw the caretaker around. The caretaker looked confused when I mentioned the writing. He just shrugged and said he didn't see or hear anything. I tried scrubbing the black messages on the wall, faded a bit, but the words were still visible. The red marker on the floor looked stubborn, like it had stained the concrete. I knelt down and used a harder sponge, but it only blurred the edges of the letters. The shapes were still there. He saw my friend. I felt restless the whole time. Every sound in the hallway startled me. My mind started to wander. Who was he? Why would someone write like that? For the next few days I was busy with my music. I tried to ignore the marks, but they were always in the corner of my eye. Sometimes I moved my device so I didn't have to look at the writing on the floor. Other times I taped a piece of cardboard over the words on the wall, but I knew they were still there. The caretaker's reassurance didn't do much for me. I kept thinking someone had a key or someone that was sneaking in. Whenever I took an afternoon off, I decided to talk to the building manager again. I went upstairs, found him in the small office next to the lobby. I told him about the article. He seemed surprised but calm. He said the last tenant was a musician, but that guy left months ago. He never complained or mentioned anything strange. The manager also insisted no one else had rented the space, since he offered to lend me some paint to cover up the graffiti if I was offended. That's when I realized I was alone. No big explanation, just me and those words. I painted over the writing on the wall with a small can of white paint, mostly covering the black letters, but I could still see a faint outline if I looked closely. The FL floor was a bigger problem. I tried painting it too, but the red marker had soaked through first coat of paint. I did a second coat, although there is still a slight shadow of the letters. If the light hits at the right angle, my nerves are on edge every time I walk into that place at night. The basement is colder. I started hearing these soft noises, the creaking in the pipes. The caretaker told me it was normal, just water still running. Whenever I heard them my stomach would turn and I would stop whatever I was doing to listen. I would wait for any sign of someone lurking around. Sometimes I would open the door to the hallway just to check no one was there. Every time the messages messed with my head. They were simple, but they fueled my imagination. Have you heard his voice? He seen you. It was like a warning or a question, but I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't sure if I should be worried about a stalker or if it was just random SC rubies. I tried to focus on the music, but the stress made it hard to concentrate. My recording sounded lifeless. My mind wasn't in the right place. After a month I started dreading my visits. That basement smell made me feel claustrophobic. I noticed every flicker of the overhead lights. I found myself glancing over my shoulder. Even when the caretaker was nearby I felt exposed, like the walls had eyes. I hated this. Feel like I would rent this space to create, not stress about strangers or mysterious notes. One evening I decided I had had enough. I packed my main gear, guitar, microphone, a small mixer. I left some cheaper stuff I planned to get back. My hands were shaking because I carried the boxes up the stairs. I kept listening for footsteps behind me. My scalp tingled every time I heard the echo of my own footsteps. When I reached the lobby I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The next morning I canceled the lease. I told the building manager I had found another location that fit my schedule. Better he didn't push it. He just said he understood and he would keep my deposit if I left before the end of the contract. I accepted that. I didn't want to argue. I wanted to get out of there. I went back one last time to get the rest of my stuff. The caretaker saw me in the hallway and asked if there was a problem. I said I just needed another space with more air. He nodded like he had heard that reason 100 times. I wondered if he suspected the real reason, but I didn't want to explain the messages again. I wanted to be done. As I walked into the office I saw the faint marks on the wall where I had painted them were almost unreadable now. The floor was covered with an old rug I had laid down. I folded the rug up and tucked it underneath. I caught a glimpse of the faint red letters one more time. It made my heart pound again. I hurriedly, as I carried the last box out, I took one last look at the empty room. The overhead light flickered. A low hum filled the silence. The smell of damp concrete lingered. My face was hot and I could feel my pulse in my neck. I locked the door behind me, walked away feeling relieved. No more scribbled words, no more strange chills, no more musty basement again. I told myself it was all just random vandalism by a previous tenant. Maybe some stressed out musician wrote nonsense on the wall. That explanation made sense. The manager said no one else was there, so maybe it was old, maybe it was ignored, until I realized the fear came from not knowing it was it. But still, every time I remember that red phrase I feel a knot in my stomach. He saw you. I can't explain why it bothered me so much, but it saw me. Never went back to that building. I don't have any ghost stories or evidence of intruders, maybe just the graffiti left behind, but I still remember the feeling of panic. My palms were sweaty, the way my eyes glanced, every shadow felt real to me, and that was enough to make me leave. That's my story. No dramatic ending, no revelation, just a studio in the basement, weird words on the wall, and I walked away before anything worse happened. Some people might laugh at that, but I don't care. I still don't want to see those words again. I still remember that night with absolute clarity. We were on our way home from a barbecue. It was almost midnight and there were no street lights around, the only light coming from my headlights cutting through the darkness. My heart was still pounding from the noise and joy at the party, but there was also something else that I couldn't explain. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. The asphalt seemed endless and I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. My name is Mark. I was driving my old car, a late 90s model. It had done some mileage, but it had never given me serious problems. I had recently changed the battery and had the alternator checked a few months before. I trusted that car. It got me through sea and a few road trips without much trouble that night, although it would show a side that I hadn't seen. My friends Alex and John were with me, Alex in the front passenger seat, John in the back. The three of us had spent the day at a friend's house having a barbecue. We had eaten too much and probably had more to drink than we should have, but I felt stable enough to drive. I didn't tipsy, I was just tired. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard and it read 11:48 p.m. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I could smell the lingering smoke from the grill on my clothes. The windows were rolled up and the cabin felt a little stuffy. I turned on the aircon, but it only blew out moderately cool air. After a while Alex started talking. He told a joke about one of our acquaintances, a guy we all knew from town. This acquaintance was known to be very religious. He always carried a small religious book in his pocket and he didn't drink or party. Alex said something like I bet he would quote verses to us if he was there tonight. I laughed a little. John chuckled from the back seat. We didn't mean it in a bad way, just teasing. But then Alex pushed it further. He started mocking the friend's beliefs, imitating his seriousness. The tone, we all laughed, but deep down inside I felt a little uncomfortable, even though right then, maybe in the middle of Alex's joke, there was something had happened to the car lights. Overhead lights flickering even though it was not on was set to door. We were driving home from a gathering, and John made a joke about a friend believing in premonitions. The group laughed, but as soon as the word premonitions was uttered, the dashboard lights flickered. The radio screen went black for a second, the air conditioner fan dimmed, and the headlights dimmed so much that the road ahead almost disappeared. A shiver ran down my spine. Alex gripped the armrest, and John was silent. I tried to act calm, but I couldn't deny the unease. There was no curb or gas station in sight, so I decided to keep driving. No one said anything. The engine hummed steadily, but I was aware of every little sound, the squeal of the accelerator, the rattle of the air conditioner vents. My heart was beating faster than usual, my mind stuck in the moment. After a few minutes of silence, Alex said, "This is weird. It happened right when we were joking about it." I shrugged, trying to say it was a coincidence, but I didn't believe it myself. John muttered, "That's weird." He seemed shaken, despite trying to sound tough. Alex joked again, "Is God punishing us?" He laughed, but his tone was strained. At that moment, the car shook violently. The headlights were so dim I thought we'd lost them. The engine wheezed as if it were about to die, the dashboard went dark, save for the faint glow of the hazard lights. I gripped the wheel, my eyes glued to the darkness ahead. Sweat poured down my forehead. Alex cursed, and John shouted, "What the hell?" Then everything went back to normal. The engine started up again, the headlights came on, the dashboard flickered and stabilized. I gasped, my hands shaking as I reached for the water bottle. "That's enough," I said. "No more jokes about that." Alex and John fell silent, as if in tacit agreement. Maybe the car had just had an electrical fault, but the coincidence was too perfect. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, but part of me couldn't deny the unsettling feeling. We drove on in silence. The lights stopped flashing, the engine ran smoothly, everything seemed back to normal. When I saw the sign for the main highway, I breathed a sigh of relief. There were finally streetlights, a few other cars around. A sense of security returned. We started talking about random things, sports, recent games, avoiding any topics related to religion or belief. I dropped John off first, near his quiet neighborhood, hoping nothing strange would happen. Old houses. I waited until he got in the front door, then I drove Alex to his house. On the way to Alex's house we barely spoke. I think we were both replaying the drive in our minds. I remember looking at him and seeing the tension in his jaw. He gave me money for gas and I waved, saying, "Don't worry." I was still confused. After dropping him off I went home, parked the car and sat there for a minute before getting in. I was sweating and my heart was still pounding. I locked the door feeling uncertain. The next morning I woke up early. I felt like I needed to figure out what was wrong. I took the car to a local mechanic, a guy called Rick I had known for years. I explained the symptoms. The dashboard lights were flashing, the headlights were dim, the engine was almost dead. I told him the battery and alternator were pretty new. He opened the hood and checked the cables, tested the electrical system, ran diagnostics. After an hour he said he didn't found any problems, everything seemed fine, no error codes, no loose wires, no weird voltage drops. He shrugged and said maybe a one-time glitch. That answer didn't satisfy me, but I had to accept it. I drove the car that day around town trying to get it to flash again. I turned on all the lights, the AC started, the music loud, nothing happened, it ran perfectly. I called Alex and John afterwards. They both asked if I found any problems. I told them no, we joked about it but we avoided it. The religious angle, I just felt weird mentioning it, as if we didn't want to tempt fate again. To this day the car hasn't had the exact same problem. It's been years and I still can't explain it. I've changed a few parts since then, spark plugs, a belt, some filters, but never fixed any wiring issues, as no one found any when I mentioned it to people. They said it sounded like an electrical short or maybe a problem with the ignition system, but no one could explain why it fit our jokes the way it sometimes happened late at night. I replayed it. In my head, we were on that dark road, far away from people talking about something we shouldn't have. Every time we pushed that line the lights went out, then when we stopped the car was running perfectly. Maybe it was a weird coincidence or a random electrical problem due to vibration whenever we talked too loud, but it was consistent enough to freak us out. Why was it realistic? Because every part of it could be a mechanical problem. Sometimes the wiring could be broken, a connection could be loose, maybe a small short had shoved when we talked or moved in the seat. No ghosts, no shadows, no final explosion, no one died, but the coincidence made me feel it felt like something wanted us to stop talking even after all these years. I still don't have a better explanation for it. It was the wiring, maybe something else. All I know is that it happened and I don't want to repeat that experiment. I've learned to be careful with what I say, especially on deserted streets late at night. I came home that night feeling like a dead battery. I had worked a long shift, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of sleep. I pushed open the door to my small apartment and threw the key on the kitchen counter. It was cramped with only one bedroom and a small living room attached to the kitchen plus a bathroom in the corner. I liked it because it was cheap and close to my work, and I usually didn't have to share it with anyone. I found the quiet relaxing that night, even though something was wrong. As soon as I walked in, I locked the front door out of habit. The click of the latch gave me a little comfort, and I told myself that tiredness is playing tricks on me. The living room is the size of a walk-in closet. I have a small couch against one wall, a TV opposite, and barely enough room for a coffee table. The kitchen is a couple of cabinets, a stove, and a fridge all lined up together. The wall. This place smells old, like I need to open a window, but I'm too tired to care. My bedroom is to the right, separated by a thin door that I usually leave open. The bathroom is a small space on the other side with a narrow shower stall, a toilet, and a small sink. Soon after, I throw my coat on the couch, take off my shoes, and trudge straight into the bathroom. I'm too tired to do anything else. I turn on the shower, adjust the temperature until it's as hot as it can get, and step into the water. The steam blurs my vision, and for a second I close my eyes. The dull ache in my shoulder starts to ease. I let the water hit my back and try to think of something that doesn't. Bedroom floor. My eyes widened and I stared at the bathroom tiles. My first thought was that maybe the upstairs neighbor was walking around, but the footsteps sounded so close it felt like they were just a few feet away. Right in my bedroom, I reached into the faucet and turned off the water, leaving me completely silent. Small drops of water dripping from my hair onto the bathroom floor. I listened, trying not to make a sound. Then I heard another soft noise like a creak on an old floorboard. I swallowed. My throat suddenly went dry and my heart was pounding. Speeding up, I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around my waist and walked towards the bathroom door. I hesitated, my hands were shaking, and I realized I was standing there in a small bathroom with only a locked wooden door between me and whoever might be out there. I flipped the bathroom door lock. My pulse was pounding in my ears. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded weak. I cleared my throat and tried again, a little louder. Someone was silent. I pressed my ear to the door, but all that I can hear my own breathing. My hair is dripping. Water falls to the floor. After maybe half a minute, I decide to open the door. I have no weapon and I'm not even wearing pants, but I think if there is someone inside it's better to face them right away, because waiting is worse for my nerves. I turn the lock, turn the knob, and open the door a crack. I glance into my bedroom. My lights are off and the room is dark except for the faint glow from the hallway light. I poke my head out and scan the room. My bed is unmade. The pillows are piled up. My wardrobe door is partially open, but that's normal because it never latches. Yes, everything looks the same as when I left that morning. I walk into the bedroom. My footsteps hit the carpet because my feet are still wet. I check the wardrobe first, yank the door open. There's nothing inside but wrinkled shirts and my old shoes. Then I tiptoe to the corner between the bed and the wall. Although there's barely enough room for a person to hide, I bent down to look under the bed, only to find a few cardboard boxes and some dust. I tried to ignore the goosebumps on my arms. I kept reminding myself that I lived alone. No one else had a key. I walked into the living room, my wet feet leaving marks on the hardwood floor. My couch was empty. The small kitchen was exactly as I had left it, although the fridge was humming as usual. I checked. The apartment door was still locked from the inside. I felt my shoulders relax a little. I told myself that I must have imagined it, or maybe it was the pipes that were wide open. Old buildings always do that, especially when the weather changes. The thing is, I knew the pipes were clanging or banging, not the slow, deliberate footsteps, but I tried to brush myself off, I dried myself off in the bedroom, put on sweatpants and a t-shirt and went back to the kitchen to heat up a can of soup. I still felt tense, but I tried to focus on the task service. I turn on the stove, pour soup into a small pot and stare at it while it heats. The silence in the apartment heavier than usual. I turn on the TV in the living room just loud enough to cover the silence. Some random late night show is on the screen. I glance but can't focus. My mind keeps going back to those footsteps after my soup is done. I slurp it up standing at the counter. I don't want to sit. I can't sit. I keep looking over my shoulder at the bedroom. It's pitch black. The only light is the dim light from the living room lamp that shines halfway up the door. I think about turning on the bedroom light, but I feel a little silly. If I'm dealing with an overactive imagination, then going around turning on every light still doesn't make any sense. I can't shake the anxiety. After washing the dishes, I check the apartment one more time. I look in the bathroom that juts out behind the shower curtain. I check under the sink. Even though no one can get in there, I look under the sofa. I glance at the small coat closet near the front door. No anything. I feel a little better. I lock the door from the inside, then go to bed. It's only about 10:30 p.m. but I'm so tired. My body is exhausted from work. I turn off the living room light so the apartment is dark except for the faint light of the street light through the bedroom window. I lie on the pull-out bed, cover up to chest and close eyes for a while. I just listen to the faint sound of cars outside in the distance, the deep voices of neighbors, and the occasional honk from the street. Slowly, I start to relax. Then just as I am half awake and half asleep, I hear those footsteps again. It sounds right outside my bedroom door. My eyes widen and my breathing speeds up. There are 2 steps, then stop, then 2 more steps, like someone is walking. My body goes cold. I slowly sit up in bed, trying not to make any sudden noises. The bedroom door is open so I can see the shape of the hallway. Nothing is moving there. My heart is pounding really loud. I think maybe it is an echo. The footsteps this time are louder. I fumble for my phone on the nightstand and turn on the screen to light up the area. I can't see anything in the door frame. My hands are shaking so much I almost drop my phone. I am debating whether to call the police, but what am I going to say? I hear footsteps but no one is here. They will come, and looking around, probably finding nothing, I slide out of bed trying to be as quiet as possible. My bare feet hit the cold floor. I gripped the phone and headed towards the bedroom door. Opening, my knees felt weak. I looked into the hallway. It was dark and I could only see the shapes of the furniture in the living room. I walked slowly and carefully into the hallway. The air was cold. I listened, holding my breath. I couldn't hear anything except the pounding of my own heart. I turned on the lights. The hallway, the living room looked empty. The front door was still closed. I tiptoed through the living room, checking every corner. I stood there for a minute, phone in hand. I scanned the space. Nothing. I realized I was sweating even though the apartment was cool. My face was red and my mouth was dry. I swallowed and tried to calm down. I walked to the door and opened it quickly, expecting to see someone in the hallway. Outside, no one was there. The hallway was empty. The lights were dim. I stuck my head out and looked both ways. Silent. I closed the door, lock up, and do my stupid habit of checking behind the couch, inside the bathroom closet, under the bed. Everything is empty. When I finally crawl back into bed, it's almost midnight. I turn off the bedroom light, stare at the ceiling and wait. My whole body tenses like a coiled spring every time a pipe squeaks or the fridge clicks. I'm startled. I find myself hyperventilating, so I force myself to breathe slowly. My head is spinning with thoughts. Have I locked the windows? Has no one snuck in yet? Earlier in the day, I lose my mind from exhaustion. I lay there for hours, unable to sleep. Every time I start to fall asleep, I startle awake thinking I hear a stream or a soft noise. Doesn't help when the building makes random noises. Sometimes the building is old and the walls are thin. I'm on the 2nd floor, so sometimes I can hear the guy upstairs, but the footsteps I hear seem to be in my house, not upstairs. I can't explain it. Around 3 a.m. I wake up, put on slippers, and walking around the apartment, I turn on the living room light. I turn on the TV and the first random show that comes on is some commercial for kitchen appliances. I stare without really understanding. I just need the occasional distraction. I turn the TV off and don't listen to anything. Then I turn it back on. After a while, my eyes start to burn with fatigue. By 4, I'm so tired my head keeps falling forward. I decide to try sleeping on the couch. I grab a thin blanket from the bed and lie down on the couch, leaving the living room light on. I face the bedroom door, keeping it in my line of sight. The hallway is still lit, so if something moves in there I hope I'll see it. I close my eyes and try to relax. My back starts to ache from the couch, but I'm too tired to care. I may have dozed off for 20 minutes or so, but Around 4:30 I hear light footsteps in the bedroom again, my eyes snap open, the TV is still on with the volume low, the hallway light cast a weak beam of light on the bedroom door. I didn't see any movement, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up, my eyes started to tear up. From the tension, my heart was pounding in my chest. I lay still on the couch, one hand clutching the blanket, the other holding the phone. I lay there motionless for at least 10 minutes, no more noise. Finally I mustered up the courage to get up and check the bedroom again. The room was exactly as before, empty. The sheets and pillows were all messed up on the bed and I could smell my own sweat on the pillow. I looked in every corner, shook the curtains, opened the closet and almost stuck my head in nothing. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, the TV on and the lights on. My eyes widened. I felt a cold sensation on the back of my neck. I checked the time, 11:20. I tried to talk to a few of my floor neighbors, but no one else seemed to hear anything. Some told me they slept with earplugs, others said they never heard the noise. Our building manager, the director, shrugged and told me the walls were thick and maybe I had some beams or shared pipes that were transmitting the noise from another part of the structure. He suggested I just ignore it, which is what I tried to do for a while. Then about 3 weeks ago I noticed something strange I hadn't seen. The guy upstairs. For days I assumed he was on a business trip, but the noise at 11 continued. It was as loud as ever, furniture scraping, footsteps, spic banging. A few nights later I decided to stay up and watch a movie until I heard the sound start. As soon as it started I ran out into the hallway to confirm. The hallway was quiet and still, no strange noises, no echo of movement. I went back inside. The noise continued above me like clockwork. One morning I ran into the building manager in the lobby. He asked me if I had any contact info for the guy on the 4th floor. I said I didn't. He told me that the guy had moved out a few weeks ago, maybe even a month. I felt my stomach drop when he said that. I told him I had just heard noises coming from that apartment the night before. He said that was impossible because the apartment was empty and the keys had been returned. I kept quiet after that because I didn't want to appear paranoid, but inside I felt a tightness in my chest that lasted the rest of the day. The noise came back at the usual time. I sat in the armchair staring at the ceiling, my hands shake a little. The floor above me creaked with heavy footsteps. It sounded like 2 or 3 steps, but it could have been just one. People moving around. The scratching started again. The furniture on my ceiling was shaking. I could see dust coming down from the corners of my mouth was dry. I wanted to run upstairs, but I felt a strange sense of dread. This place was supposed to be deserted, but I heard the noise clearly above me. I tried calling the manager on his cell phone, but he didn't pick up. I walked around the living room and heard a steady footstep above me. I considered calling the police, but I didn't have enough information to rely on except strange noises in an empty apartment. My mind was racing with possibilities. Maybe someone was occupying it, maybe a homeless person found a way in, or perhaps a contractor was using the space without permission. But why did they only show up at 11 at night? Why would they drag furniture around the next day? I convinced myself I should do something more direct. I waited until the afternoon. When the noise never came, I took the elevator up and tried. The door was locked. I put my ear to the door. I didn't hear anything. I checked the hallway window, looked around for any sign of forced entry, but everything seemed normal. The door was dusty. The doorknob was cold. I stood there for a while feeling a strange unease in the pit of my stomach. I finally went downstairs and tried to do my thing that evening. I got home from running errands around 7 a.m. I cooked a quick dinner, tried to watch some TV to calm down. By 10:30 I was on edge. My heart was racing and I hadn't even heard a sound. I was jumping into the creaks in my apartment. When the clock read 10:55, I turned off all the lights. I sat in the dark on the couch, listening. At exactly 11:01, I heard the first bang. It was right above my kitchen area. Then the second bang in the living room ceiling. Methodical footsteps. My breathing became shallow and I felt my chest tighten. I quietly walked to the front door, opened it. Just a small yelp, and listened in the hallway. The hallway was silent, not a sound. I turned around and closed the door. Footsteps and the scratching continued. Above, I turned on the flashlight on my phone and looked up at the ceiling. Paint chips were peeling around the corners. Every time there was a loud noise I could feel the vibrations under my feet as if the whole building was transmitting that movement down to me. Then I heard a long scratching sound like furniture being dragged the entire length of the apartment. My skin was rashy and covered in goosebumps. My heart was pounding so hard I felt pressure in my ears. At that moment I started talking loudly to myself. I said things like, "This isn't happening. That apartment was empty, but the noise continued. The tension in my body turned into a constant pain in my shoulder. I ignored it. I grabbed my keys and my phone and rushed out into the hallway and up the stairs to the 4th floor. I stopped right outside the door. My hands were shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I tried the lock. I pressed my ear to the wood. It felt cold and lifeless. No sound from the other side. I stood there breathing heavily. My mind was buzzing with confusion. If anyone was there I would hear but the hallway was quiet, only a faint hum from the overhead lights. After a few seconds of silence listening, I turned and walked back up the stairs. My phone flashlight caught the dust particles in the air. I went down to my apartment, closed the door and locked it. The noise continued as soon as I sat down on the couch. I couldn't make sense of it. It was like the sound was sealed in that space, could only be heard from my apartment. The next day I told the manager everything. He repeated that the apartment was empty. The previous tenant had moved out and that no one else had a key. He said it could be old plumbing or some pipes that were open at night. That didn't make sense to me. I knew the difference between creaking pipes and actual footsteps. We argued for a while, but he shrugged and said he didn't know anything. If he didn't tell me, I felt frustrated and confused. I started sleeping in the living room with the TV on, hoping it would cover the noise, but it didn't help much. The sound, the footsteps and the shuffling sound go through my ceiling at the same intensity every night. Sometimes it freaks me out so much I have to go out and walk around the block until I feel calmer, but when I come back the noise is still there. My anxiety is starting to affect my appetite. I skipped meals because my stomach was in knots. One night the shuffling sound got worse. It lasted for an hour. It kept scraping from one end of the apartment to the other. My ceiling light shook slightly with each vibration. I was sure something was about to burst. My chest felt tight and my forehead became clammy. I kept checking the time, pacing back and forth in the living room. I held the phone ready to call someone, but I didn't know the person. My hands were shaking and I could feel my pulse in my neck. Around midnight the scratching stopped. The footsteps slowed down and then disappeared. I sat on the floor exhausted. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was imagining things, but my ears don't lie. I could feel the vibrations. The next day I thought about trying to contact the owner of the apartment, but I had no idea who it was. The manager wouldn't give me any personal details. He probably thought I was a nuisance. At the time I even considered breaking in just to prove to myself no one was there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Now I sit here every night waiting for the noises to start. They always do the same. The neighbors are gone. The apartment is still empty, but the footsteps and the shuffling of things keeps going on and on. I feel trapped. Part of me wanted to go upstairs and break the lock and see what was inside. Died. Another part of me thought it was a bad idea. Maybe it was better not to know. Maybe I should just pretend not to hear, see nothing but the noises that haven't subsided. If anything, they're getting more frequent. Some nights they start earlier, around 10:30, and last until midnight. I can't sleep, I can't think straight. I feel my pulse pounding in my temples every time I hear the first click of a thumb. In the morning I wake up with dark circles under my eyes and a sharp pain in my chest. I haven't told my friends because I don't want them to think I'm losing my mind, but I can't live in denial forever. I wonder if I should pack up and move. This building is old and the rent is cheap, but it's not worth the stress. Moving is still expensive. I don't have any money right now, so I stay here night after night, listening to something that shouldn't be happening. It's 10:55, I'm hunched over the kitchen table, typing this because I need to vent. I've been bracing myself for this sound. My hands are shaking a little. I keep swallowing because my throat feels dry. The window next to me shakes with a slight breeze, but it doesn't hide the sound that's about to start. I look up at the ceiling and my stomach churns. There's a faint rivulet right on time. My heart rate picks up. I can hear a slow, steady footstep from above, then another. My ceiling light shivering. I feel my chest tighten. The scratching starts and it echoes throughout my apartment. I put my hands over my ears, but it doesn't help. The sound goes straight through me. My lungs feel strangled. My mind is racing. My back is cold and sweaty. I don't know what's making these noises. I don't know if it's a person or something else, or if I'm just hearing some weird quirk of this old building, but it's real. I feel it in my bones and I can't decide what to do. Should I go upstairs and see for myself? Should I open the door? Should I risk looking like a crazy person to the director, or should I carry on, pretend I don't hear these late night movements right now? Heavy and constant footsteps. My ceiling creaks under the weight of each footstep. The scratching is louder than ever. My ears are ringing. I'm tired and I'm scared. Scared. I have no proof, but I know there's something up there, something moving furniture around and pacing back and forth in the empty apartment. The manager says it's empty. It's supposed to be empty, but I can hear the noise clear as day and they won't Stop. I guess that's my story so far. No one's been hurt, no one else has reported anything. I'm alone in this and I'm losing sleep. I can't go on living with these nightly visits, but I also can't face whatever is upstairs, at least not yet. I'll just sit here, hands shaking, teeth gritted, listening to the steady footsteps above me in that locked, empty apartment. Maybe tomorrow I'll do something about it, or maybe I won't. I really don't know, but this is my life right now and I can't pretend it isn't happening. All I can do is sit here night after night waiting for the first noise at 11 o'clock and on and on. I still remember the first moment I heard footsteps echoing in a place that should have been empty. My name is Mark. I worked as a security guard. A building materials warehouse located in a run-down industrial estate on the outskirts of town. I had a routine that usually consisted of walking around the perimeter, checking the fence and making sure the gate was locked. Most nights nothing happened. I filled in a diary, noting any small events, and waited for my shift to end. That's how things went for the first few months. Everything was quiet and predictable. The isolation never bothered me. I didn't pee gate post, looking at the distant lights of the nearby factories and feeling comfortable in my own space. But one night everything changed. Now I don't feel comfortable starting my shift. I feel stressed. I arrive at the warehouse around 10 p.m. The outside lights are dim enough to see main gate, and part of the parking lot. Yard is mostly gravel and concrete slabs. Large building with metal walls and high ceilings. Trucks come in during the day, but after 6 p.m. the place gets quiet. There is a small office at the front where I keep my stuff, a thermos of water, coffee, a flashlight and a control panel that displays the camera feeds. A no-frills security system. We have a few cameras located near the dock and along a few of the hallways. Inside I can see them on a small black and white screen. The sensors pick up motion, and if they detect anything they create a bright spot on the screen. In normal conditions I only see small spots when a cat wild wandering in, or if a sheet of plastic flapping in the wind near an open window, but lately those spots have started to feel ominous. The first time I heard footsteps was around 2 a.m. I was sitting on a metal stool inside the office. I had the door open as it was stuffy in there, especially on warmer nights. Inside the main warehouse was dark, but there was a long corridor leading from the office area to a series of storage rooms. It was a drab space with concrete floors and walls lined with shelves full of spare parts and boxes of bricks. I heard footsteps coming from that corridor, clear and regular. At first I thought it might be water dripping on a loose board, or maybe some machinery expanding or contracting, but it didn't sound random. It was a series of footsteps, as if someone was walking slowly. I stood up and picked up the flashlight. My stomach tightened. I felt a sudden cold sweat on the back of my neck. I told myself it could be a thief looking for copper wire or tools to steal, which wasn't unusual around here. So I walked out of the office and turned on the flashlight. The dark corridor, my headlight cut across the stacks of pallets showing dust floating in the air. I moved slowly, eyes staring into the distance. The footsteps stop. As soon as I get close I call out, "Is anyone there?" I get no answer. I expect maybe the sound of someone running away, or a shadow quickly darting behind a shelf, but nothing. The place is silent except the faint hum of a distant noise. The light bulb. My hands are sweaty. I feel the grip of the flashlight become slippery. After a few seconds I walk further into the hallway, checking behind the boxes and looking under the shelves. I see no one. My heart is pounding and I feel my breathing is louder than usual. I go back to the office and check the cameras. The display flashes on one of the sensors, but only for a split second. No clear shape, just a quick blur, then nothing. I stare at the screen for a few minutes waiting to see if anyone can back to the sensor line. The last one is still flat. I assume it is my imagination, or maybe just a weird echo, but I can't get rid of it. The feeling that something was wrong. The second time it happened was a few nights later. At the same time I was walking around the perimeter. As usual I checked the fence, walking behind the loading dock and back to the front office. As I entered the warehouse I heard a noise like a light scratching on concrete like skates. For a second I stopped. I listened closely, then the footsteps started. They got heavier, time like boots. I turned quickly and shined the flashlight at the end of the hallway. That's when I saw a dark figure. It stood still facing me. I couldn't see a face, just a shadow. I stopped breathing for a second. I expected it to run or scream. It didn't do anything. It just stood there motionless. My heart was pounding. My arms were numb. I wanted to call out, but my throat tightened. I forced myself to say, "Hey." My voice echoed. The figure didn't move. I stepped forward, shining the light directly at it. The shape seemed to flicker, as if the edges weren't stable. I blinked and moved the beam around, trying to focus. Then I stepped back closer, maybe 10 steps. When I got there it disappeared. Nothing but empty space. I circled around the area. I checked every corner. I looked behind The stacks of boxes, I couldn't find anyone. I felt a shiver in my arms like I was freezing. Even though the inside of the warehouse wasn't cold, I was about to run out and call the police, but what was I supposed to say when I saw a shadow in the office? I checked the camera. Recording. I just saw a series of short flashes. The motion sensors turned on in succession as if something was passing quickly in front of them, but I never got a clear picture. It just looked like static. It didn't make sense. I know what animals look like on these cameras. They don't trigger each sensoring. This perfect sequence made me replay the footage several times, but it didn't help me understand it. For the rest of my shift, I remained vigilant. I walked around more often, expecting to find signs of a break-in. I checked all the locks on the doors leading to the yard. Everything was safe. As the sun began to rise, my nerves were damaged after that night. I couldn't relax during each shift. I felt like something was watching me. I started to hear faint sounds, tapping on metal shelves, scraping along the walls, and those footsteps. Sometimes they were very light, almost like bare feet on concrete. Sometimes they were louder, like heavy boots. I started to get scared when I left the office. Even stepping out onto the main floor felt dangerous. I would hold a flashlight and scan every corner. I checked behind pallets and crates, expecting someone to jump out. No one ever did that. No signs of a break-in, no items missing, no day workers reported anything unusual. I mentioned these noises to one of the foremen, but he just shrugged and said the place was old. He told me not to worry about it. Eventually, I stopped talking to the staff about it because they treated it like a big joke. They would say things like "watch out for ghosts" and laugh. I didn't think it was funny. I tried to keep track of the times I heard footsteps or saw flashes on the camera. Nothing clear pattern. Sometimes it happened close to midnight, other times after 3 a.m. Sometimes I worked a whole shift without being disturbed, but that rarely happens. I started having trouble sleeping during the day. My routine was broken because I kept waking up and remembering it was still dark. Imagine one night I decided to walk around the Ayer warehouse every hour on the hour. I wanted to prove to myself that it was just me being nervous. So at 11 p.m. I scanned the whole place. I checked the storage rooms, loading docks, and hallways. I recorded everything. Nothing unusual. At midnight I repeated the process. Was fine until 1 a.m. I felt more relaxed. I thought if I kept busy maybe I wouldn't have imagined things. Then around 1:30 a.m. I was sitting in my office. I saw the light on the camera feed flashing. It jumped from camera 1 to camera 3 in a few seconds, which meant something was moving from the south entrance near the loading dock straight to the main hallway without passing in front of camera 2. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside. I could feel pulse in temple, my hand shaking. I walk into the hallway and immediately hear something moving near the corner. It sounds like a quick shuffle. I rush to the corner and shine my flashlight around. I catch a glimpse of what looks like a shoulder or part of a back. A shape turns into the next hallway. It's not a cat or a reflection, looks like a person. I run forward. My shoes hit the concrete hard. The beams above me rattle with every step. As I turn the corner, I don't see anyone, just a dead end with some stacked plywood and metal pipes. No exit, nowhere to go. I walk around the stacks of wood expecting to corner someone. There's no one there. I feel my stomach tighten. My breathing is rapid and my legs are weak. I try to steady myself by leaning against a stack of plywood. My flashlight vibrates. I listen for any sound, but all I hear is my own breathing. No explanation for how someone could disappear into thin air. That time, that's when I realized I was really scared. I wasn't just in a state of stress anymore. I felt a deep physical fear. My arms were tingling and I wanted to quit, but I needed the job. I wasn't really rich and I couldn't quit without notice, so I swallowed that feeling and stayed until morning. I didn't tell anyone about this particular incident because I knew they wouldn't believe me. They would think I was crazy or lying. For the next few weeks it got worse. The footsteps came more often. At night I still feel it. I patrol, I check the cameras, and I wait. It doesn't hurt me physically, and I haven't seen any evidence of a break-in or theft, but the tension is constant. The footsteps keep echoing in the hallways that should be empty, and every time I rush to it with a flashlight I only see darkness and silence. I leave in the morning with stiff shoulders and a headache. I come back the next night hoping it will be quiet this time, but it never is. The presence is always there, just out of sight, reminding me I am not alone in this empty warehouse. And it is the story. I hear it, I see it in flashes, I feel it every time I walk through those doors. It never speaks, never shows its face, never does anything except make me doubt my sanity, but it is there and I can't ignore it, so I keep showing up. Flashlight in hand, trying to do my job. It is my life right now, and that's all I know. I always thought my evening runs were my comfort zone. I never expected them to become a source of stress after work. I usually take the loop route around this neighborhood and Pass an old textile mill, it's defunct and pretty quiet, there's a fence around it, some rusty signs, broken windows here and there and no signs of life inside. It's always dark, the street lights on that stretch of road are either too dark or completely off. It's hard to see more than a few meters at night, but I like it because it's quiet, less people around, less traffic, and no one bothers me when I'm just trying to clear my head after a long day. That used to be my favorite part of running until a few weeks ago. One night I felt off. For the first time I remember feeling like I wasn't alone. I was jogging, listening to my own breathing, trying to keep a steady pace, my footsteps echoing on the pavement. Usually that's the only noise I hear besides the wind, but that night I kept thinking I heard a pair of footsteps. It was faint and I didn't know if it was my imagination. At first something made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that maybe it was an echo or maybe a car a block away, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. My shoulders tightened and my jaw tightened. I felt a heavy pressure in my stomach as if I had swallowed a stone. I decided to stop. I stopped, turned around and looked around the street. Nothing. The street was deserted, a few street lights were flickering, the fence around the factory looked the same as always, the rusty chain had some barbed wire on top. I couldn't see anything moving in the darkness. My heart was beating faster than usual, my breathing became irregular. After a minute of standing there, I shook my head, chuckled to myself and kept running. Nothing happened that night. When I got home I felt silly. I showered, ate a light dinner and tried not to think about that. A few days later, I was walking the same route again. I passed the factory again. The feeling of being followed came back, this time more intense. My pulse pounded as soon as I turned. The road that led past that building, the sidewalk on that block was cracked and there was usually some trash in the gutter. I heard my footsteps hitting the ground, but again I swore I heard another set of footsteps behind me. The noise stopped whenever I slowed down. I turned back a few times. Each time no one was there. It was quiet and I still felt my throat tighten. There was a chill at the back of my neck even though it wasn't a cold night. My hands were sweaty so I wiped them on my shorts and tried to speed up, just wanting to get out of that stretch. The next day I couldn't stop thinking about that factory in my head while I was working. I kept picturing it while typing emails. I couldn't tell if I was scaring myself for no reason or if there was something more to it. That night I ran after it again, same route. I was determined not to let my imagination get the better of me, but that feeling came back as soon as I stepped onto the factory block that appeared on my right. The tall windows were mostly broken or boarded up. Some graffiti on the walls was not clearly visible. The lights inside me moved along the sidewalk at a faster pace. My eyes scanned left and right. A feeling of unease weighed on me. My legs felt heavier than usual. My breathing was shallow. I found myself constantly glancing back. Still no one there. After a few more nights I was fed up. We were driving home from a gathering, and John made a joke about a friend believing in premonitions. The group laughed, but as soon as the word premonitions was uttered, the dashboard lights flickered. The radio screen went black for a second, the air conditioner fan dimmed, and the headlights dimmed so much that the road ahead almost disappeared. A shiver ran down my spine. Alex gripped the armrest, and John was silent. I tried to act calm, but I couldn't deny the unease. There was no curb or gas station in sight, so I decided to keep driving. No one said anything. The engine hummed steadily, but I was aware of every little sound, the squeal of the accelerator, the rattle of the air conditioner vents. My heart was beating faster than usual, my mind stuck in the moment. After a few minutes of silence, Alex said, "This is weird. It happened right when we were joking about it." I shrugged, trying to say it was a coincidence, but I didn't believe it myself. John muttered, "That's weird." He seemed shaken, despite trying to sound tough. Alex joked again, "Is God punishing us?" He laughed, but his tone was strained. At that moment, the car shook violently. The headlights were so dim I thought we'd lost them. The engine wheezed as if it were about to die, the dashboard went dark, save for the faint glow of the hazard lights. I gripped the wheel, my eyes glued to the darkness ahead. Sweat poured down my forehead. Alex cursed, and John shouted, "What the hell?" Then everything went back to normal. The engine started up again, the headlights came on, the dashboard flickered and stabilized. I gasped, my hands shaking as I reached for the water bottle. "That's enough," I said. "No more jokes about that." Alex and John fell silent, as if in tacit agreement. Maybe the car had just had an electrical fault, but the coincidence was too perfect. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, but part of me couldn't deny the unsettling feeling. We drove on in silence. The lights stopped flashing, the engine ran smoothly, everything seemed back to normal. When I saw the sign for the main highway, I breathed a sigh of relief. There were finally streetlights, a few other cars around. A sense of security returned. We started talking about random things, sports, recent games, avoiding any topics related to religion or belief. I dropped John off first, near his quiet neighborhood, hoping nothing strange would happen. Old houses. I waited until he got in the front door, then I drove Alex to his house. On the way to Alex's house we barely spoke. I think we were both replaying the drive in our minds. I remember looking at him and seeing the tension in his jaw. He gave me money for gas and I waved saying, "Don't worry." I was still confused. After dropping him off I went home, parked the car and sat there for a minute before getting in. I was sweating and my heart was still pounding. I locked the door feeling uncertain. The next morning I woke up early. I felt like I needed to figure out what was wrong. I took the car to a local mechanic, a guy called Rick I had known for years. I explained the symptoms. The dashboard lights were flashing, the headlights were dim, the engine was almost dead. I told him the battery and alternator were pretty new. He opened the hood and checked the cables, tested the electrical system, ran diagnostics. After an hour he said he didn't found any problems, everything seemed fine, no error codes, no loose wires, no weird voltage drops. He shrugged and said maybe a one-time glitch. That answer didn't satisfy me, but I had to accept it. I drove the car that day around town trying to get it to flash again. I turned on all the lights, the AC started, the music loud, nothing happened, it ran perfectly. I called Alex and John afterwards. They both asked if I found any problems. I told them no, we joked about it but we avoided it. The religious angle, I just felt weird mentioning it, as if we didn't want to tempt fate again. To this day the car hasn't had the exact same problem. It's been years and I still can't explain it. I've changed a few parts since then, spark plugs, a belt, some filters, but never fixed any wiring issues, as no one found any. When I mentioned it to people, they said it sounded like an electrical short or maybe a problem with the ignition system, but no one could explain why it fit our jokes the way it sometimes happened late at night. I replayed it in my head. We were on that dark road, far away from people, talking about something we shouldn't have. Every time we pushed that line the lights went out, then when we stopped the car was running perfectly. Maybe it was a weird coincidence or a random electrical problem due to vibration whenever we talked too loud, but it was consistent enough to freak us out. Why was it realistic? Because every part of it could be a mechanical problem. Sometimes the wiring could be broken, a connection could be loose, maybe a small short had shoved when we talked or moved in the seat. No ghosts, no shadows, no final explosion, no one died, but the coincidence made me feel it felt like something wanted us to stop talking. Even after all these years, I still don't have a better explanation for it. It was the wiring, maybe something else. All I know is that it happened and I don't want to repeat that experiment. I've learned to be careful with what I say, especially on deserted streets late at night. I came home that night feeling like a dead battery. I had worked a long shift, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of sleep. I pushed open the door to my small apartment and threw the key on the kitchen counter. It was cramped with only one bedroom and a small living room attached to the kitchen plus a bathroom in the corner. I liked it because it was cheap and close to my work, and I usually didn't have to share it with anyone. I found the quiet relaxing that night, even though something was wrong. As soon as I walked in I locked the front door out of habit. The click of the latch gave me a little comfort, and I told myself that tiredness is playing tricks on me. The living room is the size of a walk-in closet. I have a small couch against one wall, a TV opposite, and barely enough room for a coffee table. The kitchen is a couple of cabinets, a stove and a fridge all lined up together. The wall. This place smells old, like I need to open a window, but I'm too tired to care. My bedroom is to the right, separated by a thin door that I usually leave open. The bathroom is a small space on the other side with a narrow shower stall, a toilet and a small sink. Soon after I throw my coat on the couch, take off my shoes and trudge straight into the bathroom. I'm too tired to do anything else. I turn on the shower, adjust the temperature until it's as hot as it can get and step into the water. The steam blurs my vision, and for a Second, I close my eyes, the dull ache in my shoulder starts to ease, I let the water hit my back and try to think of something that doesn't. Bedroom floor, my eyes widened and I stared at the bathroom tiles. My first thought was that maybe the upstairs neighbor was walking around, but the footsteps sounded so close it felt like they were just a few feet away. Right in my bedroom, I reached into the faucet and turned off the water, leaving me completely silent. Small drops of water dripping from my hair onto the bathroom floor. I listened, trying not to make a sound, then I heard another soft noise like a creak on an old floorboard. I swallowed, my throat suddenly went dry and my heart was pounding. Speeding up, I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around my waist and walked towards the bathroom door. I hesitated, my hands were shaking, and I realized I was standing there in a small bathroom with only a locked wooden door between me and whoever might be out there. I flipped the bathroom door lock, my pulse was pounding in my ears. Hello, I called out, my voice sounded weak. I cleared my throat and tried again, a little louder. Someone was silent. I pressed my ear to the door, but all that I can hear my own breathing. My hair is dripping, water falls to the floor. After maybe half a minute, I decide to open the door. I have no weapon and I'm not even wearing pants, but I think if there is someone inside it's better to face them right away because waiting is worse for my nerves. I turn the lock, turn the knob and open the door a crack. I glance into my bedroom. My lights are off and the room is dark except for the faint glow from the hallway light. I poke my head out and scan the room. My bed is unmade, the pillows are piled up. My wardrobe door is partially open, but that's normal because it never latches. Yes, everything looks the same as when I left that morning. I walk into the bedroom, my footsteps hit the carpet because my feet are still wet. I check the wardrobe first, yank the door open. There's nothing inside but wrinkled shirts and my old shoes. Then I tiptoe to the corner between the bed and the wall. Although there's barely enough room for a person to hide, I bent down to look under the bed, only to find a few cardboard boxes and some dust. I tried to ignore the goosebumps on my arms. I kept reminding myself that I lived alone, no one else had a key. I walked into the living room, my wet feet leaving marks on the hardwood floor. My couch was empty, the small kitchen was exactly as I had left it, although the fridge was humming as usual. I checked, the apartment door was still locked from the inside. I felt my shoulders relax a little. I told myself that I must have imagined it, or maybe it was the pipes that were wide open. Old buildings always do that, especially when the weather changes. The thing is, I knew the pipes were clanging or banging, not the slow, deliberate footsteps. But I tried to brush myself off. I dried myself off in the bedroom, put on sweatpants and a t-shirt and went back to the kitchen to heat up a can of soup. I still felt tense, but I tried to focus on the task service. I turn on the stove, pour soup into a small pot and stare at it while it heats. The silence in the apartment heavier than usual. I turn on the TV in the living room just loud enough to cover the silence. Some random late night show is on the screen. I glance, but can't focus. My mind keeps going back to those footsteps. After my soup is done, I slurp it up, standing at the counter. I don't want to sit, I can't sit. I keep looking over my shoulder at the bedroom. It's pitch black. The only light is the dim light from the living room lamp that shines halfway up the door. I think about turning on the bedroom light, but I feel a little silly. If I'm dealing with an overactive imagination, then going around turning on every light still doesn't make any sense. I can't shake the anxiety. After washing the dishes, I check the apartment one more time. I look in the bathroom that juts out behind the shower curtain. I check under the sink. Even though no one can get in there, I look under the sofa. I glance at the small coat closet near the front door. No anything. I feel a little better. I lock the door from the inside, then go to bed. It's only about 10:30 p.m. but I'm so tired, my body is exhausted from work. I turn off the living room light so the apartment is dark except for the faint light of the street light through the bedroom window. I lie on the pull-out bed, cover up to chest and close eyes. For a while I just listen to the faint sound of cars outside in the distance, the deep voices of neighbors, and the occasional honk from the street. Slowly I start to relax, then just as I am half awake and half asleep, I hear those footsteps again. It sounds right outside my bedroom door. My eyes widen and my breathing speeds up. There are 2 steps, then stop, then 2 more steps, like someone is walking. My body goes cold. I slowly sit up in bed, trying not to make any sudden noises. The bedroom door is open so I can see the shape of the hallway. Nothing is moving there. My heart is pounding really loud. I think maybe it is an echo. The footsteps this time are louder. I fumble for my phone on the nightstand and turn on the screen to light up the area. I can't see anything in the door frame. My hands are shaking so much I almost drop my phone. I am debating whether to call the police, but what am I going to say? I hear footsteps, but no one is here. They will come. And looking around, probably finding nothing, I slide out of bed trying to be as quiet as possible. My bare feet hit the cold floor. I gripped the phone and headed towards the bedroom door. Opening, my knees felt weak. I looked into the hallway. It was dark and I could only see the shapes of the furniture in the living room. I walked slowly and carefully into the hallway. The air was cold. I listened, holding my breath. I couldn't hear anything except the pounding of my own heart. I turned on the lights. The hallway, the living room looked empty. The front door was still closed. I tiptoed through the living room, checking every corner. I stood there for a minute, phone in hand. I scanned the space. Nothing. I realized I was sweating even though the apartment was cool. My face was red and my mouth was dry. I swallowed and tried to calm down. I walked to the door and opened it quickly, expecting to see someone in the hallway. Outside, no one was there. The hallway was empty. The lights were dim. I stuck my head out and looked both ways. Silent. I closed the door, lock up, and do my stupid habit of checking behind the couch, inside the bathroom closet, under the bed. Everything is empty. When I finally crawl back into bed, it's almost midnight. I turn off the bedroom light, stare at the ceiling and wait. My whole body tenses like a coiled spring every time a pipe squeaks or the fridge clicks. I'm startled. I find myself hyperventilating, so I force myself to breathe slowly. My head is spinning with thoughts. Have I locked the windows? Has no one snuck in yet? Earlier in the day, I lose my mind from exhaustion. I lay there for hours, unable to sleep. Every time I start to fall asleep, I startle awake thinking I hear a stream or a soft noise. Doesn't help when the building makes random noises. Sometimes the building is old and the walls are thin. I'm on the second floor, so sometimes I can hear the guy upstairs, but the footsteps I hear seem to be in my house, not upstairs. I can't explain it. Around 3 a.m. I wake up, put on slippers, and walking around the apartment, I turn on the living room light. I turn on the TV and the first random show that comes on is some commercial for kitchen appliances. I stare without really understanding. I just need the occasional distraction. I turn the TV off and don't listen to anything. Then I turn it back on. After a while, my eyes start to burn with fatigue. By 4, I'm so tired my head keeps falling forward. I decide to try sleeping on the couch. I grab a thin blanket from the bed and lie down on the couch, leaving the living room light on. I face the bedroom door, keeping it in my line of sight. The hallway is still lit, so if something moves in there, I hope I'll see it. I close my eyes and try to relax. My back starts to ache from the couch, but I'm too tired to care. I may have dozed off for 20 minutes or so, but around 4:30 I hear light footsteps in the bedroom again. My eyes snap open. The TV is still on with the volume low. The hallway light cast a weak beam of light on the bedroom door. I didn't see any movement, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. My eyes started to tear up from the tension. My heart was pounding in my chest. I lay still on the couch, one hand clutching the blanket, the other holding the phone. I lay there motionless for at least 10 minutes, no more noise. Finally I mustered up the courage to get up and check the bedroom again. The room was exactly as before, empty. The sheets and pillows were all messed up on the bed and I could smell my own sweat on the pillow. I looked in every corner, shook the curtains, opened the closet and almost stuck my head in nothing. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, the TV on and the lights on. No more footsteps, or if I did I probably muted them. The next morning I was devastated. My eyes were bloodshot and my neck was stiff. I walked around checking everything, but everything was normal. No signs of forced entry, no random objects moving, no footprints on the floor. Just my own footprints from earlier. It was one of those experiences that made my mind spin. Maybe it was the pipes, or maybe the upstairs neighbor was walking in some sort of way that fooled my ears. Maybe the floor was expanding with the temperature change. No proof anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those footsteps were in my bedroom and not upstairs. I had no reason to believe in anything supernatural, but I couldn't explain it either. That's why it felt so real. I was there, I heard it, and I couldn't find anything else. Explanation: I had no visitors that night and also no roommates. I heard those footsteps more than once. I eventually chalked it up to building noise or some kind of coincidence, but I will never forget how my heart pounded when I heard someone walk into my bedroom. I have had sleepless nights before, but that night was a class apart. It felt like I was living in someone else's space, or they were living in mine, and I couldn't see them. Even now I still think about it sometimes, especially when I get home late and the apartment is dark and quiet. I guess you never really know all the sounds an old building can make, or maybe you do and you try to ignore them, but that night there was no way to ignore anything. It was just a few feet away and kept me awake until the sun came up. I drove into that area expecting a quiet drive and a few photos. Creepy. I Never thought I will end up alone in the dark listening to the whistle as it winds around my bones. I am an amateur photographer who pursues ghost rumors and strange happenings in my spare time. I often see old drafty houses or strange lights. This time it was different. The land was empty, the sky was vast, and the air was holding its breath. The first night when I heard the whistle outside my tent, I realized I was in a place that did not follow the usual rules. I arrived in the afternoon on a dusty road that seemed to stretch on forever. Pale green fields and dotted with small rocks stretched out on both sides. There were no neighbors, no farms, no animals, just the wind blowing through the tall grass. The only signs of life I noticed were a few brown bushes and maybe a hawk or two circling overhead. The sun was high in the sky and the heat radiated from the earth in waves. I felt myself sweating. The smell gathered around my neck. Even with the window down, I drove looking for a good spot to set up camp. My goal was simple. I wanted to photograph any signs of the spirit that was rumored to whistle at night. The locals in the nearest town had warned me that they said whistle lure people away from safety or sometimes flag them down, but they had no details. They just shrugged and shook their heads. When I asked for more information, they told me no one had ever been out there for so long. I thought it was like an old story retold for tourist purposes, so I tried to act normal. When inside I was excited. I found a small clearing near a group of weathered boulders. Those rocks looked as if they had been there forever, formed by the strong winds that never seemed to stop. I parked near them and pitched my tent in the shade. The wind picked up a bit, making the tall grass roll like a slow wave. On the car radio, can't find any channels. I try my phone, but no signal. I decide to accept the isolation. The first day passes calmly. I walk around with my camera taking pictures of the landscape. Nothing unusual happened. The sun is bright and the temperature makes the horizon sparkle. I look for traces of footprints or old campsites, but all I see are scattered rocks, some broken branches, and endless grass. Late afternoon, the wind starts to cool. I take out a small camping stove and heat some tin soup. I watch the sun set behind the hills. The color in the sky looks clear and sharp with streaks of orange and red. I turn on my flashlight and sit in the tent ready to wait. My camera has a new battery charged and I have a voice recorder. In case facing the night starts to get quiet. I hear the crickets chirping echoing across the vast expanse. I move around the rocks and scan the horizon. I see nothing, the grass, rocks, and a faint line of hills in the distance. The whistle fades, then starts again. It must be getting closer. My skin tingles. I try to hold my breath. Calm down. I raise my camera and take a few pictures, hoping the flash might catch something. I wait. I feel the hair on my arms stand up. Then the whistle stops. Silence, except for my own breathing. After a while I return to my tent feeling restless. I decide to jot down a few notes in my voice recorder. As I speak I notice my voice shaking. My neck stiffens and my stomach churns with tension. I finally fall asleep. The next morning I wake up with a warm ray of sunshine on my face. It feels so strange, as if I imagined the whole thing. The day is normal again. The sky is blue and the grass sways gently. I have a quick breakfast and play back my voice recorder. I hear my own voice describing the whistle, but in reality I couldn't hear it. It was missing from the recording, which struck me as strange. There is often background noise, even if faint. I tried to shake off my frustration and decided to explore further on foot. I walked for about an hour towards the low hill, carrying my camera and some water. The landscape didn't change much, all grass and rocks. The wind touched everything. I was always alert, scanning the horizon for any people or animals. At one point I spotted a couple of large birds in the distance, but that was all over by midday. I rested and had a drink near a cluster of rocks. I noticed some shallow scratches on the rocks like old carvings, but they looked natural. The sun was very strong, so I returned to camp late in the afternoon. The clouds were drifting in the wind, which accelerated, making the tent flaps creak. I could feel the tension in the air, as if a storm was about to hit. I decided to set up my tripod and see if I could get any shots of the landscape under the approaching clouds. Close as I focus my camera, my hands are shaking a little. I actually find myself thinking about the siren the night before and feeling uneasy about the hours ahead. As darkness falls, I sit on a camping stool outside my tent. I turn off the flashlight and let my eyes adjust to the moonlit plain. My heart beats faster as time passes. I am waiting for that siren. I feel exposed in the open space, but I want a clear view of whatever may be coming. For a while nothing happens. The wind rustles through the grass and I hear some creaks far away from the rocks. Then I notice a faint sound drifting on the wind. It is the same siren, steady, a little deeper this time. My jaw is clenched. I try to stay calm. I pick up my camera and point it towards the sound, but I can't see The movement the siren gets louder and it changes pitch as if it is reacting to my presence. I stand up and walk out of the tent. My body feels stiff, pulse pounding in my ears. I tried to speak loudly asking who was there. My voice broke. The siren stopped, then started again almost cheerfully. I took a few steps forward, scanning the horizon. That's when I noticed a shape. It was barely visible, a darker outline in the night. It was standing near a small hill maybe 100 yards away. It looked tall and still. My fingers felt cold even though the air was still warm. I adjusted the camera lens and took a few pictures. My breath caught in my throat when I realized the figure was wearing a hood. I couldn't see a face, no details, just a hooded shape motionless in the moonlight. The siren drifted across the distance gently but persistently. I wanted to run, but I also wanted to record it, so I tried to get closer, keeping my camera ready. I walked slowly, my shoes crunched on dry ground. I turned off the flashlight because I didn't want to startle anything out there. The figure didn't move, but the siren never did stop. I get closer until I'm maybe 50 yards away, and then the wind blows, the grass bends the other way, and I lose sight of that figure for a second. When I look back, it's gone. The whistle, however, continues. My heart is pounding so hard I think I might pass out. I sweep the flashlight across the grass and stones. Is nothing. I want to run back to the tent, but I don't want to turn my back on that place. The whistle starts to fade, then sounds again behind me. I turn around. Flashlights all around, whizzing across the field, but no one there. I feel dizzy. I force myself to go back to the campsite. Once I'm in the tent, I fumble for the recorder. My mouth is dry and my hands are shaking. My scalp is tight and my shoulders ache from the tension. I've recorded a few words to describe what I started hearing: strange noises around 2 a.m. At first, it was just a faint buzzing of lights, but then I heard it more clearly: heavy footsteps. They echoed in the hallway, starting and stopping as if someone was pacing back and forth. There were no voices, no doors opening or closing, just an eerie silence after each movement. It gave me goosebumps. At least now I had proof that something was going on, but at the same time, it scared me even more. I thought about showing it to the manager, but decided against it. I didn't want to be seen as a troublemaker or a paranoid. So I kept quiet. Over the next few nights, the strange activity continued: heavy footsteps, unusual flashes on the cameras, the feeling of being watched that wouldn't go away. Sometimes, I caught a glimpse of a figure at the end of the hallway, but it disappeared before I could see it clearly. Every night was a mental torture, my heart pounding every time I had to climb the stairs. 2 weeks ago, I had an experience that still gives me goosebumps when I remember it. Around 1 a.m., I was watching the security screen when the camera on the top floor started flashing more than usual. Then it went black for a few seconds. I tried switching to another camera, but they were all off. Then the image came back, and I saw a figure standing motionless at the end of the hallway, right in front of the last door. It was too dark to make out a face or any features. It didn't move, just stood there facing the camera. My heart was pounding. I was about to run up to check, but at that moment, the figure disappeared, and the camera returned to normal. I grabbed my flashlight and ran upstairs with shaking hands. When I got there, the hallway was empty. The ceiling light was humming, and the door was locked as usual. I checked every corner, every closet, every room. Nothing. The air was heavy, damp, and foul. I felt nauseous and left as quickly as I could. Then I started asking the day shift cleaners. They didn't work nights, but they knew the building well. A man in his 50s told me that he always felt uneasy going up to the 5th floor, though he couldn't explain why. He didn't use flowery words, just that the place made him shiver. He never saw anyone, but sometimes he heard strange sounds when he worked late. This reassured me somewhat. At least I wasn't the only one who had experienced this feeling. But it also confirmed that what I had experienced wasn't just my imagination. I continued to do this job, listening to the sound of the empty hallways every night. I thought about quitting. My stomach clenched every time I climbed the stairs. The footsteps still echoed. The mysterious figure would occasionally appear on the camera, but when I played it back, nothing was recorded. There was no evidence except the feeling of being watched, the musty smell that never went away, and the strange flickering lights. Every time I unlocked the door to start my shift, I felt a tension in my chest. I did this because I needed the money, but part of me was always preparing for something worse. So far, no one had been hurt, and I had seen no sign of an intruder. But every time I reached the top floor, I knew I was not alone. I didn't tell anyone the whole story, because most would just laugh or tell me I was imagining things. But I knew the truth. I heard the heavy footsteps. I saw the strange lights on the monitor. I smelled the musty smell and felt the fear tightening in my chest. Night after night, I learned to live with it. And so far, that's all I can do. Then one night, when I moved into my new apartment, I woke up with a cold sweat running down my neck and my heart pounding. My bedroom door was ajar, though I clearly remembered closing it before I went to sleep. The hallway light was off, but a faint glow was coming from the bathroom. I walked over and noticed the bathroom door was wide open. I was sure I'd closed it. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure out what was going on. I checked the front door, still locked. No windows open. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really alone. I am a 36-year-old man, recently divorced and trying to start a new life in a small ground-floor apartment in a quiet residential area. The apartment is in an old building with thick walls and narrow hallways. The landlord told me that the previous tenant had moved out because he wanted to live closer to work. I didn't think much of it. I liked that it was affordable and I had enough space. But after the first few nights, I realized that there was something wrong with the doors. Every night before going to bed, I made sure that all the doors in the apartment were closed. Sometimes, I even locked the bathroom door just to check that it was still in place. But the next morning, I often woke up to find some of the doors open, even though I clearly remembered closing them. At first, I thought it might be the wind, but when I checked the windows and door frames, I didn't find any gaps. The doors wouldn't move, no matter how hard I tried to create artificial air in the room. Yet each night they would mysteriously open. I began experimenting. I placed a small cardboard box in front of the bathroom door before going to bed. The next morning, the box was pushed aside about a foot, undamaged. Another time, I placed a paperback book on the door hinge, but the next morning, it appeared on the bathroom sink. My front door was still locked, with no signs of forced entry. This scared me. I decided to keep a small notebook by my bed. Whenever I heard strange noises at night, I noted the time. Most of the noises occurred between 2 and 4 a.m. Sometimes they were just tiny creaks, other times they sounded like the door latch was moving. The sleepless nights began to affect my work. I tried to tell a colleague, but she just nodded politely and suggested that it might be the structure of the building sinking, causing the door frame to move. I considered that, but the speed and repetition of the phenomenon did not make sense. I decided to take some security measures. I put small pieces of tape on the top edge of the door. If the door was opened, the tape would tear or fall off. But the next morning, all the tape was gone without a trace. I began to fear that someone was entering my apartment every night, moving around me while I slept. But the main door had a deadbolt and a chain lock, and the windows were solid. There was no sign of forced entry. My sleep became increasingly worse. I would wake up in a cold sweat around 2 or 3 in the morning, my heart pounding, my mouth dry. I would listen in the dark and sometimes hear soft noises from the other side of the apartment. I forced myself to check every room, living room, kitchen, bathroom, and each time, I found a door open when I was sure it had been closed. Sometimes the bathroom light would be on or the hallway closet door would be ajar. But I never saw anyone. I tried using a doorstop, a small wedge that holds a door in place. But every morning, I would find it pushed aside, and the door would still be open. I had no explanation for what was going on in this apartment. My apartment had no signs of a break-in, no signs of a break-in. But every morning I woke up feeling helpless. One night, around 2:15 a.m., I heard slow footsteps echoing in the hallway. My bedroom door was closed. I quickly reached for the nightstand, grabbed my cell phone, and sat up, listening nervously. My heartbeat was so loud it almost drowned out all other sounds. I considered calling the police, but didn't want to make a scene unless I was sure someone was home. Finally, I stood up. I crept toward the door, barely breathing. My legs were shaking, feeling weak. I opened the bedroom door, facing the dark hallway. I reached for the light switch, the bulb flickered and then came on. Nothing unusual. The apartment was eerily quiet. I checked the bathroom, pulled back the shower curtain, empty. I checked the front door, still locked, the chain bolt intact. I tried shaking the doorknob, nothing. Standing in the dark, my throat tightened with tension. The uneasiness didn't go away. I finally crawled back into bed, staring at the ceiling until the alarm clock went off at 6:30 a.m. I woke up, exhausted from lack of sleep. On the weekend, I decided to stay up late to observe. Around 1 a.m., I made coffee, set up a chair in the living room facing the hallway, leaving only a dim light on in the corner. I waited, phone in hand, trying not to fall asleep. At 2:40 a.m., my eyelids drooped. Suddenly, there was a soft sound, a scratching sound. I opened my eyes wide, sat up straight, my heart pounding. I looked toward the bathroom door. It was still closed, but the doorstop I'd placed earlier had been moved aside. I picked up my phone, turned on the camera, and pointed back down the hallway. Cautiously, I stepped forward, realizing the bathroom door latch was still locked. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. There was no other sound. After a few seconds, I slid the latch, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. The door opened with a small click. I slid my phone in first, filming the small room. The lights were still off. I turned on my phone's flashlight, illuminating the area, nothing unusual. The small window was still locked. I swallowed, my breathing quickened, my palms sweaty. I stepped outside, almost tripping over the doorstop lying on the floor. There were no scratches or signs of tampering, as if it had simply been moved without anyone touching it. The next morning, I went to the store and bought a cheap motion sensor camera. I placed it in the hallway, facing the bathroom and bedroom doors. I tested it, it worked fine. That night, I left it recording overnight. When I woke up the next morning, the camera was off. The battery was still alive, but the switch was turned off. I checked the footage. The last recording was at 2:13 a.m., and then there was static. The last frame showed an empty hallway, the bathroom door still closed. I stared at the image, searching for a clue. There was no one, no sign of what had happened. But I knew something was wrong. I no longer felt safe in my own apartment. I lay in bed, tensely waiting for the slightest sound in the night. Another time, I tried opening all the doors at night to see if anything had changed. I had dinner, watched some TV, and fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke up in the middle of the night, everything was still quiet. But I had the feeling that someone was standing in the doorway, staring at me in the dark. And when I turned on the light, the door was still closed as if nothing had happened. The mysterious apartment. I have never believed in ghosts. Hauntings are a figment of my imagination, at least I used to think so. But there are things that happen that I can't explain, and I'm afraid that if I tell them, people will think I'm crazy. It all started a few months ago, when I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. The rent was cheap, the location was convenient, and the landlord wasn't too demanding. I had no reason to refuse. When I first moved in, everything seemed normal. I rearranged my furniture, cleaned up, and enjoyed my new space. But after only a week, strange things started happening. The closet door in the hallway. It never stayed where I left it. Every night before I went to bed, I made sure I closed it, but the next morning it was open, sometimes a little wider. I told myself that maybe I had forgotten to close it completely. But then things got weirder. One night, while I was watching TV in the living room, the light suddenly went out. I jumped, my heart pounding. The phone was still on, no sign of a power outage. I tried turning the light back on, and it came back on immediately. But when I turned to the hallway, the closet door was wide open. This time, I was sure I had closed it. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that maybe the hinges were loose. I taped the door shut. But the next night, I woke up in the middle of the night to a small sound, a very soft rattling. When I opened my eyes, I saw the streetlights coming through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. The closet door was half open. The tape I had put on yesterday was gone. A chill ran down my spine. There was no one else in the apartment but me. The front door lock was intact. There was no sign of an intruder. But somehow, the door still opened every night. I decided to install a small camera facing the hallway to see what was happening while I slept. I checked the switches, replaced the batteries, made sure everything was working properly. Then I went to bed, trying to ignore my fear. The next morning, the memory card was gone. The camera was still there, but there was no data on it. I searched the apartment, the floor, under the furniture, but there was no trace. I felt sick. Did someone take it? Or did something not want me to know the truth? I couldn't sleep for the next few days. I locked my bedroom door, left the light on all night, but the closet door was still open in the morning. There was a creaking sound in the middle of the night, even though I hadn't heard anything while I was sleeping. I decided to leave the apartment. I told my landlord that I would be moving out at the end of the month. I didn't care about the deposit anymore, I just wanted to get away from this place. The last night, I tried something else. I put a chair in front of the closet door. I wanted to see if it would move. 3 in the morning. A loud bang woke me up. I turned on the light immediately. The chair was pushed aside. The closet door was wide open. And right in front of it, on the floor, there was a black handprint, as if someone, or something, had touched it with dirty hands. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw my things into a suitcase, not bothering to pack carefully. I left that night. I rented a hotel room, and the next morning, I officially left the apartment for good. From that day on, I didn't hear any more creaking, didn't wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I was being watched. I stayed at a friend's house, and slept soundly for the first time in weeks. I don't want to think about that apartment anymore. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when I close my eyes, I still hear the sound of the closet door opening in the darkness. And I wonder, if I go back there, will I still find my camera? Or will I find something else waiting for me? Mysterious passenger. It was almost midnight, colder than usual. The streetlights were scattered, creating deep shadows. I was a taxi driver, doing this job for many years, but tonight there was something strange. There was an eerie feeling in my heart as I accepted a ride from the outskirts of the city. I drove to the pickup point. A man stood by the side of the road, the dim light barely illuminating his face. He was wearing a dark coat, his figure thin. When I stopped the car, he got in and sat in the back seat. He didn't say a word. "Where are you going?" I asked, looking in the rearview mirror. He was silent for a moment, then gave an unfamiliar address. His voice was low and hoarse, a little tired. I nodded and started driving. After a while, I realized the passenger was whispering something. It sounded like a strange language, unlike any I had ever heard. I ignored it at first, but it became more and more obvious, not loud, but insistent, like a mysterious chant. I tilted my head, trying to hear what he was saying. "Excuse me, what are you saying?" The passenger stopped immediately. I glanced at the rearview mirror, catching his eye. A slight jolt ran down my spine. There was no answer, just a stare that made me tighten my grip on the steering wheel. A strange feeling began to take over, as if I had lost control of my surroundings. About 10 minutes later, my phone crashed. The GPS was distorted, then completely dead. I touched the screen, but it didn't respond. This had never happened before, especially on this route. "The signal's gone," I muttered, not sure if I was talking to him or to myself. There was no response from the back seat. I tried the radio, but it was just a blank screen. No music, no noise. Just an eerie silence. I was starting to get really nervous now. "Turn here," the passenger said suddenly, speaking clearly for the first time. I looked toward the road on the right. It was darker and more deserted than usual, not like a main road. I hesitated but turned in anyway. The streetlights were sparse, casting strange shadows on the road. The houses on either side had their shutters closed, as if the whole neighborhood had long been abandoned. We passed intersections, and each time I tried to turn onto a brighter road, he fell silent, until I reached an empty area. The buildings were crumbling, the air heavy and oppressive. "Stop here," he said. Not a request, but an order. I slowed down, feeling a shiver run down my spine. I looked in the mirror. The passenger leaned forward, his face revealed in the dim light. He smiled, but there was no friendliness in it. It was a weak, eerie smile, and his eyes were so lifeless that they sent a chill down my spine. I felt the need to unbuckle my seatbelt, just in case I needed to move quickly. Then he chuckled, a laugh that was not amused. He opened the door, stepped out. But the way he moved was not normal. Not walking, but gliding. In a flash, he disappeared into the darkness. I stuck my head out the window, trying to follow him. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no figure. There was only a deserted street and a heavy atmosphere pressing down on my chest. My instincts told me not to stay any longer. I started the engine, stepped on the gas, and drove away. No looking back. No stopping. Just getting out of this area as quickly as possible. When I got back to a more crowded area, my phone suddenly started working again. The GPS started up, the radio played normally. It was as if nothing had happened. But I knew it had. I never took another ride from that area again. And I'll never forget the look in his eyes in the rearview mirror. Strange noises in my house last night. Everything changed around 11. I was in my bedroom brushing my teeth and going about my usual routine. Where I live is an old 2-story house with creaky floors and doors that don't always close properly. I've lived here alone for the past 3 years. I rent cheap because most people don't want an old house with drafty windows and unpredictable plumbing. I never mind those little inconveniences, they feel manageable, but what happened last night was unmanageable. All I had changed into a T-shirt and sweatpants. I was reaching for the light switch when I heard distinct footsteps in the hallway. At first I froze. I told myself it was probably falling wood or a small animal outside, but these footsteps had a weight to them. They sounded slow. Deliberate footsteps on the hallway floor. I looked at the door and felt my heart beat fast. I live alone and uninvited. No one else should be walking around. My first thought was that maybe someone had broken in. I stood there listening, not moving for a solid 5 seconds. My mouth went dry. I swallowed and grabbed the closest thing I could use as a makeshift weapon, which was a heavy flashlight next to the nightstand. I turned off the bedroom light, thinking that if anyone was there they probably wouldn't notice me right away. I moved closer to the door, pressed my ear to the door. The hallway was dark, so I couldn't see anything through the crack under the door. The footsteps stopped for a moment. I waited, every muscle tensed, hoping they would continue. Instead, I heard something else, a soft dragging sound like fabric on the floor. Then the footsteps started again, as if someone was pacing back and forth. I gathered up the courage to open the door. A shout. I wanted to look into the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. As soon as I touched the doorknob, I heard a muffled voice, so faint at first I thought I might be imagining things, but then it got clearer. It sounded like someone was whispering in a language I couldn't recognize. The voice was deep and hoarse, and the words made no sense except for one word. My name was certain. Hearing my name in between those strange syllables, I pulled my hand away from the door knob. Startled, my stomach went cold, my breathing quickened, and I realized my hand was shaking. I wanted to call the police, but I also didn't want to let go of the flashlight or make any noise. I stood there uncertain. While the voice kept whispering, the sound rose and fell almost like a chant, but it didn't feel religious or comforting. It felt invasive and private. Hearing my name mixed with that foreign language made my skin crawl. I decided to try the doorknob again. My plan was simple. I turned it. The door opened quickly, shining the flashlight and facing whoever was out there. Could just be an intruder teasing me, but as soon as I tried to turn the knob, the whispering got louder. It turned into an urgent mumble so fast I couldn't hear anything apart from that voice repeating my name like a voice warning me not to open the door. I tried to turn it all the way, but it didn't work. It was strange because I had never locked my bedroom door from the inside and no one else could lock it from the outside. I shook it harder, but it was stuck in place. I pressed my shoulder against the door. It felt like it was closing, like the door frame had been opened wide. Then I felt a strong push from the other side, almost like someone was leaning against it. Rose's whisper was so loud and I could tell it was someone or something on the other side, just inches away. I felt a surge of adrenaline and tried to push the door again. I slammed my shoulder against the wood, my heart pounding in my chest and my palms were sweaty, but the door didn't budge. The voice was now just a hoarse hiss, filling my ears with strange sounds. My name was getting louder every few seconds, surrounded by that hoarse voice. I panicked, scared. I started screaming for whoever was there to leave me alone. I yelled that I was calling them police. My voice was shaking and I didn't think it sounded scary at all. I took my pH from the nightstand. The signal in my house is usually fine, but I noticed the bars were at 0. I tried calling anyway, to no avail. My throat felt tight and I was gasping for air. I stepped back from the door, still shining the flashlight in there. Even though the door was closed so the light was only hitting the painted wood, the whisper became a steady buzzing, almost overwhelming. I wasn't sure what to do next. My window faced the backyard, which was fenced in. Jumping out wouldn't be safe, plus it was a second-story window. My mind was racing with images of what could be outside my bedroom door, an intruder, a stranger, unbalanced, but that voice didn't sound normal. Long nights I love the quiet after dusk, when the roads and trails are empty and the sky turns pitch black. There is a kind of quietness that comes with darkness, and I always feel comfortable being out there alone with my tripod and camera. The quietness started to fade about 3 months ago. It started when I noticed strange shapes in my photos, dark smudges that vaguely looked like people. At first I thought it was a problem with the camera sensor or something stuck to the lens, but that explanation never worked. I cleaned everything thoroughly. I changed cameras, I used different lenses. Those shapes were still there and they only appeared when I was alone in remote places. I remember the first time I realized something was really wrong. I was standing on a ridge overlooking the little valley. The sky was clear, so I took a long exposure to capture the stars and a bit of the trees. I was alone away from the town, nearest town, for hours. Light breeze, and the only sounds coming from insects and rustling leaves in the distance. Everything was normal, so I didn't feel any immediate fear. After taking a series of photos, I checked the screen. Then I saw a shape that looked like a silhouette standing right at the edge of the frame near a row of trees that didn't look like a person walking by. It looked as still as a shadow freeze in where I felt my chest tighten, and I glanced up from the camera to see if anyone was there. I stood still, scanning the area with my flashlight, but I didn't see anything unusual. I considered it a glitch. I thought maybe my camera had captured a shadow from a branch or a strange artifact from a long exposure. But a week later I was out again. This time I was shooting an old abandoned barn right next to a dirt road in the middle of nowhere with no lights for miles. I set up camp around midnight. The barn looked creepy in the dark and I aimed to capture the texture of the wooden planks in the moonlight. I shot a few shots at different angles, adjusting the tripod height and shutter speed. Then, while reviewing a test shot, I saw a dark outline near the side of the cage that looked like a person standing with their back to me. My heart was pounding, and I lowered the camera. I looked around in all directions, shining the flashlight on the cage walls, the grass, even the fence. Nothing. When I looked back at the camera screen, the shape was in the photo. It was tall and slightly distorted. It looked almost like it turned its head towards me, but there was no facial expression. I could tell it was just a distorted shadow. I thought about leaving immediately, but I decided to take a few more shots to see if it would appear again. My hands were shaking and my breathing was weak. I remember the feeling in my stomach, a heavy lump that wouldn't go away every time I took a new photo. I checked right away. Sometimes the shape was there, sometimes it wasn't, but I never saw it with my naked eye. I just looked through the camera. I finally packed up and drove away, trying not to speed on the dark road, back to town, home. I opened the files on my computer. I zoomed in on those silhouettes in a few images. The shape looked like it had a face but was warped like it was smeared on the photo. It had eyes like the hollows and a hint of a mouth, but they were in the wrong place, as if someone had dragged them across the image with a cursor. I checked the metadata. There was nothing wrong with the files, they just had these shadows in them, inexplicable. My hands became clammy and I felt sick. Looking at them, I tried to think rationally. Maybe there was some noise with my sensor or a weird reflection, but deep down inside, I knew it felt different than a mechanical glitch. I tried to ignore it for a while. I took daytime photos and edited my backlog of photos from the past few months. Months without something strange appeared in any of the daytime photos, only the night photos, and only in remote places. After a while I decided to try again, but closer to civilization. I went to a location near the city, a small park with street lights nearby. I took a few photos. The night sky and everything looked fine, no silhouettes, no shadows. It seemed like whatever was going on only appeared when I was in more isolated areas. I convinced myself it might have something to do with some specific external interference to those locations. Then I went to the coast for a weekend trip. I camped near a rocky beach known for its beautiful night skies. There was almost no light pollution and the waves crashed against the rocks in a steady rhythm, which usually helped me relax. On the second night I set up my tripod on the shore. I could hear the ocean. I tasted the salt. The lawyer shoved them into my hands without much detail. He just gave me the address and said I could do whatever I wanted with the place. His tone seemed rushed and he avoided eye contact. I remember the tight feeling in my chest when I first saw the photo of the mansion. It looked old and dark even in the daylight. I felt nervous about going so far, but I couldn't ignore such a legacy. Now I was standing in the spacious front yard, staring at the sunken tiles and a dusty porch, the boards under my feet, the creak. With each step, the wind was still. It was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. The front door felt rough as I ran my palm over it. The wood smelled like old varnish and mold. I pushed it open and it scraped against the frame. There was something in the entryway that felt cold-like. Inside a cave. I walked in and the door slammed shut behind me. I could see a hallway stretching to the left and a curved staircase to the second floor on the right. The air was stuffy and I sensed a slight smell of damp. I glanced at the peeling wallpaper walls and street. The pattern strips were probably decades old. Some faded floral dust flew in the narrow beam of light coming from the open door. I noticed a few pieces of furniture, a small table near the stairs, a large coat rack by the wall, and an armchair with torn upholstery. In the corner the whole place felt cramped despite the large foyer. Maybe it was the low lighting or the thick shadows in every corner. I heard my stomach growling. I hadn't eaten all day. I closed the front door and locked it and walked into the hallway trying to find the kitchen. My footsteps echoed. Each step made a dull sound on the old floor. I came to a door at the end of the hallway which was unlocked. I opened it and found the kitchen. It had a long counter, a large rust-stained sink and a wooden table. In the middle there is an old refrigerator on one side. But there is no electricity in the house at the moment. I lean back against the table and open the door. Inside I have a few sandwiches and a bottle of water. I sit down and eat in silence. The taste of dry bread and warm ham doesn't matter. I am hungry. Halfway through my sandwich I notice a small noise coming from the hallway, like a whisper, but I can't make out a word. I stop chewing and hold my breath. The noise disappears. I feel a chill on the back of my neck. I clear my throat, eat the sandwich and drink some water. I decide to explore. First floor. I go back down the hallway and walk carefully, looking into each room. The living room has a few cupboards, a sofa covered with sheets and an old TV on a stand, dirty windows and little light coming into the dining room, empty except for a long wooden chair. The table and chairs are pushed aside. The air is colder there, so I don't linger. I go back to the foyer and stand at the bottom of the stairs. I look up the stairs leading to the second floor hallway, which I can see from below. It was dark. I walked up the first staircase and it creaked every step I took, making a slow moaning sound. Above I saw a long hallway with a series of doors on each side, some closed, some half open. I smelled mold and I felt a slight breeze. I walked into the first room on the right. It was a small bedroom with a single bed. Wardrobe and a window overlooking the front yard. The curtains were thick and dusty. I opened them a little to let some light in. There was a thick layer of dust on the wardrobe. I wiped my finger on it, leaving a trail on the dark surface. I heard something in the hallway, like a gentle shuffling, and turning around I saw nothing. I waited a few seconds. My heart beat a little harder. I walked back into the hallway, but it was empty. The house was silent again. I continued checking each bedroom. Most of them were old furniture, old air wallpaper peeling. Then I came to the last door at the end of the hallway. It was stuck. I pushed my shoulder against it a few times until it finally opened with a loud crack. Inside I saw a larger bedroom with a large window, with a bed, a wardrobe and a mirror on the wall. The bed frame was metal and looked rusty. The wardrobe door was slightly ajar, but I couldn't see inside from where I was standing. The full-length mirror, mounted on a wooden board, was covered in a thin layer of dirt. I caught my own reflection. My face looked tired, and there was an anxious twitch on my left side. The smell in this room was worse, a mixture of damp wood and something sour. I opened the window, but the hinges were stiff and it creaked when I finished exploring. The daylight out, knocking in the night. Ha had not moved into the house for long. It was an old townhouse, spacious but somewhat cold, especially at night. Her roommate had just moved out, leaving her alone with the silent walls. That night, Ha sat on the bed, the blue light from the laptop screen reflecting on her face. The space was so quiet that she could clearly hear the wind blowing through the window. She was typing an email when knock, knock, knock. A soft sound echoed in the room. Ha paused, frowning. She listened. There was nothing else. Maybe it was just the sound of water pipes or the wind blowing. Shaking her head, she closed the laptop and climbed into bed. But as soon as she pulled the blanket up, the sound rang out again. Knock, knock. This time, it came from the direction of the wardrobe. Ha held her breath. A chill ran down her spine. But she quickly brushed away the anxiety. It must be my imagination. She closed her eyes, telling herself she would check again tomorrow. The next morning, Ha stood in front of the old wooden cabinet. She opened the door. Inside was only an old suitcase and a few files. Nothing unusual. She tried knocking lightly on the door. There was no response. Smiling at her unfounded anxiety, she took her clothes and continued her day. But as the night fell, knock, knock, knock. The sound rang out again. This time, it was no longer gentle. It was louder. Closer. Ha sat up straight, her heart pounding. She got out of bed, hesitated for a moment, then approached the cabinet. When she pressed her ear to the wooden door, a loud clack sounded from inside. Ha recoiled, almost screaming. The doorknob didn't move. There was no sign of the closet being opened. Something must have fallen, she reassured herself, but the uneasiness clung to her all night. It was 2 a.m. The room was eerily quiet. Ha lay on the bed, eyes wide open. She couldn't sleep. Then the knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it was slow, steady. She swallowed, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket. But she knew that if she didn't check, she would never be able to sleep well again. She stood up. Each heavy step brought her to the closet. Pressing her ear to the door. Knock, knock. The knocking sounded very close, as if someone inside was trying to gently tap the door. Ha shivered. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the closet doorknob. Slowly, she turned the handle. The door hissed as it opened. A blast of cold air hit her face. Inside, nothing. Ha frowned. She shined her phone flashlight into the closet, scanning every corner. There was nothing but a suitcase and a few files. She exhaled, preparing to close the closet when the flashlight went out. The night swallowed her in darkness. She pulled her hand back, her heart pounding in her chest. Just as she was about to close the closet door. Knock, knock. This time, the knocking sounded right behind her. Ha froze. Her throat was dry, her heart felt like it was about to jump out of her chest. Her breathing became rapid. She didn't dare turn around. With all her strength, she slammed the closet door shut and rushed to the bed, pulling the blanket over her head. The knocking continued, but now it was coming from right next to her bed. The next morning, Ha left the house. She